This is David for Big Bits, and in this video we're going to take a look at the future of cryptocurrency and more specifically Bitcoin for the decade of the 2020s. Now, the last decade, which is essentially the first decade in which Bitcoin existed and cryptocurrencies, the price has shot up quite a bit, adoption has grown somewhat, but mostly people are worried about the price and what's going to happen with it. But there's been a lot of big events over the last decade, specifically with adoption and how people were using Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And it started out, I remember the first article I ever seen about Bitcoin was probably in 2009 or 2010. It was when it very first came out. I thought it was a stupid idea at the time. I had no idea anything about the technology. But they were selling it as this new currency, this digital currency, and that was it. Nobody really understood it at the time, so we all thought, that's what our bank accounts are. It's the same exact thing, but it's not. Obviously, there's a lot of resources out there. If you don't know what Bitcoin is by now, definitely check out those videos. But it's amazing to see how far we've come just from an education standpoint on how many people know about Bitcoin now. And really, over the last decade, the perception of Bitcoin was that it was only for people who were nerds at very first. The only people who cared about Bitcoin were people who were, cypherpunks, who were just interested in the technology itself, which really was a pretty good thing. There was a pretty demanding crowd for it initially, and that's how the network got launched. Granted, it was a small crowd, but they were very into what the project was trying to accomplish. Now, over time, the price shot up and went down, and then during the middle of the 2010s, the big use case was, of course, using Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for drugs. And it's very unfortunate that it got associated with that because it really tainted how Bitcoin and crypto was seen in the public. But it really brought it to light and made it more perceptive, I guess, for people to see that it's actually being used for something. Granted, it's not something good, but they're saying that Bitcoin was actually being used for something. And then go forward from that, then we have towards the end of the decade the great bubble with ICOs and hard forks, and that's really the main takeaway from the end of the decade there. And then of course we also have a lot of work going on in the background that a lot of people don't know about, such as the Lightning Network. A lot of people in the crypto scene know about that, but it's not very widely known that there's a second layer or, that there's even hard forks. But the biggest thing that happened at the end of the decade was definitely ICOs, IEOs, and this kind of gold rush for people to try and make money. So that kind of leads to the question, where are we going in the 2020s? And I'm sorry I rambled on about the last decade. This video is supposed to be about the next decade, but you kind of got to understand where we've come from and how much we've grown. You went from this small group of people who only cared about this particular technology to people who only used it to skirt around the laws for drugs to, nearly everybody talking about it at Christmas in 2017 and everybody trying to get rich off of it. And different cryptocurrencies. So where could that possibly lead? Where can it possibly go in the next decade that it isn't already at? Now, of course, you'll say, adoption. We're going to have more people using it. Well, I think that's pretty fair to say. It is fairly new technology, and it's pretty well expected that it's going to grow with adoption. But one of the main things we're going to look at in the next decade is something I tweeted about a little while ago at the end of October. And there's three main things that I wanted to take a look at, and that is that due to the block halvening schedule, number one, and I've got this here in the tweet, we are going to have less than 1 million Bitcoin left to mine at the end of the next decade. Currently, we have, I think, less than 3 million left to mine. So there's going to be 2 million, so 2/3 of the remaining Bitcoin to be mined between now and the year 2040, as expected, will be mined within the next decade. That's a huge portion of it that's going to be decreasing the inflation rate of Bitcoin. Now, of course, miners are still going to get transaction fees, so they're going to hope that people are still sending transactions over the network to make money, but the reward they get just for operating their mining rigs will go down based on their power that they put in. So, going to be a very big time, mainly because after every halving in the past, there's been a huge increase in price in the following months to the year afterward. And that's what's led to a lot of these bubbles and a lot of the hype in the past around the price. Now, I'm going to pull this up, and I'm going to bring this up a couple of times. You can see this is about a 10-year chart. This is the entire history on TradingView with the BLX, and this goes back, I think, to 2010 until as of this particular moment that the video is being recorded. So we started off here, and we kind of have this curve on the logarithmic chart. This isn't a flat chart. You know, each one of these rectangles isn't worth, you know, $5 or $10. This is, you know, $1 to $10, 10 to 100, etc. Something like that. It's growing on a log scale here. The price is going up exponentially. Now, you'll see after the halving, there was a huge increase in price, and there was another halving in 2016. After that, the price shot up again, and we're due for another one here in early 2020, which should be around here on this particular chart, which might lead to the price increasing again. But you can see kind of on the chart after every halving, the price tends to shoot up afterward, and that's because there's less Bitcoin being added every day into the ecosystem, and you'll hear this referred to as a circulating supply. But every day right now, there are 12.5 Bitcoins being added on every block. And, you know, it's every 10 minutes. And these are how many blocks we have as of this recording until the next halving. And that's, you know, nearly 20,000. I'm going to round it up to 20,000. That's 20,000 blocks of 12.5 Bitcoin each. Going forward, in 2020, it's going to drop from 12.5 to 6.25. So these people who are mining Bitcoin and selling Bitcoin aren't going to be receiving the same amount of rewards as they were before, even if their amount of network power continues to stay the same. They're still only going to be receiving half of what they received before just with the block rewards. Now, the transaction fees on the blocks vary depending on how many transactions and how much people pay for their fees, but the overall block rewards are decreasing, and this is going to happen 2 more times. And this is another chart. I should have just shown you this one, but these green lines represents when the halvings occurred, excuse me, and the price shot up pretty routinely after that. Now, this is the inflation chart that I was kind of getting at a bit ago. We can see down at the bottom on the x-axis above it, they have the rewards per segment, and you can maybe tell there's some gray lines that are a grid line on this chart, but the first segment is the first set of block rewards at 50, and then you have a 25, and then right now we are in this segment of 12.5 coins per block for the reward. You can see that these are how many, in blue is how many Bitcoins are circulating right now. So we're probably around right here, just over 18 million. And you can tell the next decade is going to take us through until 2024, would be the next halving in the next decade, which will increase the block rewards to 3.125. And then in 2028, the rewards are going to get reduced down to 1.56. And the decade is going to end right here. As you can see, this small sliver of space left of rewards that are available on the network. And really, that's quite amazing. And I got to bring up my chart again to show you. Look at the first 10 years here. We're right here. It's funny because the price seems to be kind of emulating that pattern. I mean, just look at that. It's pretty much the same curve. So if we get that same kind of action going into the future on this log scale, I mean, the prices, if they continue to go up and Bitcoin continues to be used, who knows? We could see hundreds of thousands of dollars value, because even these small movements on a log scale like this are going to be huge moves dollar-wise per each coin. So this is something to keep in mind when you're looking for the next decade. As far as price goes, I'm not terribly great at predicting long-term prices, but I could easily see if Bitcoin maintains its pace with adoption and it becomes what we believe it will be. I'm going to say by the end of the next decade, we're going to be looking at $200,000. And that might be conservative. That might be way too high. I don't know. That's just a guess. But that's assuming right here that the price is, I believe, $7,000 right now. That if it follows this kind of curve, like it appears to be doing somewhat on the actual log chart, that, you know, this seems to be 10 times maybe higher. And on a log chart, well, it might not even be that much higher, but on the log chart, I would say that would probably look to be about $200,000. But that's just a really, really wild guess. I have no idea, but I do think and believe that the price is going to go up over time. Now, I'm going to take this off the screen. We'll go ahead and look. I really wanted to touch on the block rewards, because that's going to be a huge thing in the next decade, particularly if the adoption continues to pick up, because there's going to be so few left. Remember, we're going to be right here, and this is the maximum rewards. There's going to be so few left after the end of the next decade. It is going to be a huge deal throughout the course of the decade, particularly in 2032. During that particular halving, as it's going to get very, very close, and you're going to have less than one Bitcoin reward starting in 2032. So that's a big deal going into the next decade, and then of course beyond, it gets even smaller until eventually it vanishes. But it's all very important to take a look at for the next decade. And there's one other thing I believe I had highlighted here. Yeah, so this is the thing I highlighted. There will be more than 98% mined by 2030. So that means for the next 110 years, there will only be 2% of all Bitcoin left to be mined. So no new Bitcoin other than 2% of the total supply possible over the remaining 110 years. That's hard to believe, especially if it becomes something people use every day. Now, let's go back to the tweet. And the other item I want to take a look at was that countries are racing to innovate. And this is actually going on now. It's just not really a big deal with the general public right now, but you can see this if you follow crypto news. Is that countries are indeed racing to innovate and be crypto leaders with their own digital sovereign currencies. And you might hear this referred to as CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. Now, even the US, there are people looking into this already to try and look at implementing a digital currency for the United States. This particular article says the US Fed weighs up their own CBDC as a countermove against China. It's because China has already announced that they do plan to release their own CBDC, I believe, within the next year. And that's going to be the start of the decade. And that's why I think this is going to be a huge deal over the next decade. And I think it's going to be a topic of the 2020 election cycle for president. If not this one, then the next one. And if it isn't part of this cycle, then the whole Facebook coin with Libra probably going to be a decent size issue in the current election if if it gets brought up, if crypto is a topic, then it'll be Facebook and Libra now. It might be CBDC, depending on how the politics play out, and if China releases theirs before the U.S. election. Now, if not, then definitely by 2024, because we'll have an idea of how it's worked out for China and some of these other countries. But this is very important to look at. And I think I read another article. It's probably going to be at least 5 years before the U.S. can even really move on this. Right now, at the end of this decade, they're mostly worried about impeachment and partisan politics back and forth. So not a lot's getting really done right now. The committees are moving on certain things. There's all these different regulatory agencies working, but the lawmakers themselves aren't really doing too much right now. So it's going to be a while before the U.S. moves on this, but just keep in mind, I do think this is going to be a huge deal within the next decade, because China, of course, is already doing it. I think they're the second largest country on Earth, and they're going to have their own. And then, of course, America eventually might move to it, and it seems likely if China does it, and especially if it works out for China. Now, it's not like it's just the U.S. and China. Other countries are looking at doing this, and already the Bahamas have already began to plan the launch of their digital currency, known as the sand dollar, and it's only going to be a pilot project for right now, but if it goes well, then it's going to be used throughout the entire country. They're only going to do this on one particular island to start out with, giving people wallets, but it is not really a cryptocurrency, so to say, but it is their own digital fiat currency. So it is operating similar to a cryptocurrency. It is supposed to be this ledger, this public ledger for their currency. Now, it may not be on blockchain, and it may not have some of the same properties as a cryptocurrency, which it certainly won't, but it is definitely a move towards this. And as we get people in this next decade looking towards these digital currencies, they're going to wonder, why not Bitcoin if we have a digital dollar? Why wouldn't I just have Bitcoin? It's digital too. This might go hand in hand, but the thing that I really think is going to take off with these digital currencies is that crypto exchanges, much like the Forex exchanges and stock exchanges that we work with, will be able to directly connect to these currency networks. And depending on how it's set up, they may have to get some sort of authorization to do so, which I'll touch on that in a bit. But depending on how these digital currencies are set up, it could make the on-ramp into cryptocurrencies much easier. So right now, if you want to use Coinbase, you have to set up your bank account or connect a credit card. Whereas in the future, you might just be able to use your digital currency ID, or however they have it set up, connect your digital currency account directly, and the transactions would happen immediately. Now, I'm also going to touch on how these transactions are going to work in just a moment, but that could make it much easier for people to move their money in, and with less fees, perhaps. Now, one of the things I'm kind of worried about is censoring of cryptocurrency, as it is going to become a bigger competitor to the actual fiat currencies, especially if they move to a purely digital format. Now, right now we have cash and credit cards, bank accounts, but there is no direct equivalent really to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. But when that happens, you could see a push, especially in other countries that aren't quite as free, other than the U.S. that is, that they will certainly try to quell the noise about cryptocurrencies and push their own. That way, their particular currency will have more power uh, and work more for them with political issues. So, like the US dollar is used due to its power globally as the reserve currency to play politics with other countries and kind of set regulations and restrictions on other countries based on the fact that the dollar is so valuable and all these other countries want it. So these other countries want their currency to be valuable as well so that they can do those same sorts of games. Now, when it comes to censoring, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. This guy, I don't know if you've seen him yet or not, but he has already stated, and I forget what he's on. Yeah, the House Financial Services Committee, Representative Brad Sherman, who's a Democrat from California, he's been on record in the congressional record now saying that Bitcoin is a threat to the U.S. dollar. I've watched these hearings, and he's very much against Bitcoin in the sense that it will compete with the dollar, and that crypto enthusiasts are specifically rooting for Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies to overtake the dollar. And to be fair, it's his job as a representative of America, in my opinion, to promote the US dollar, because for his sake, it makes his job a lot easier to enforce these sanctions, restrictions, regulations on other countries when the US dollar is on top. So it makes complete sense why he would say these things, but that also means you're going to have to look out for these things in the future if we do these digital currencies, and maybe even if not, these things might get censored out. And you'll also realized lately, here at the end of 2019, there was a censoring of YouTubers like myself who make crypto videos, and they had their channels flagged and given content strikes for dangerous, or I think it was potentially harmful content. But for the most part, it was just normal crypto YouTubers. I think a lot of people were shilling ICOs, things like that, so maybe they should have been flagged. But there were a lot of people who were doing legitimate content who were flagged as well, such as Data Dash, and he actually had his channel blacked out for up to a week. The decision got overturned. But this is an example of something that can happen. YouTube, of course, is the most popular platform for video sharing for cryptocurrencies. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense right now for there to be live streaming. There isn't really that many updates. People, if they live stream, they're probably just live streaming trading, so switching to a streaming platform like Twitch or something like that doesn't really make a lot of sense right now. So having the world's largest streaming site for video, well, not streaming, but the world's largest site for video sharing, YouTube, to spread the message about cryptocurrencies and provide educational content about them, it's a huge deal. If YouTube were to censor, and it might not even be YouTube or Google's decision to censor this topic, these decisions could from the government. The government could pass a law. It goes back to this one that says you're not allowed to promote these things. These are illegal activities that we're doing here. So you can't do these things. And YouTube, following those rules, will go through and, of course, censor them then. Right now, this seems like it was a bit of an accident. It wasn't really meant to happen, so a lot of them have been overturned. But this is just an example of what could very well happen. So a lot of people are also suggesting that you switch to decentralized platforms. There are decentralized video sharing sites, but of course they're not popular yet. So you want something that's going to return well on search results if you're making videos. People aren't just going to make videos to make videos for the most part. Now, if you're making a video for your project, it doesn't necessarily have to be on YouTube. But if you're trying to reach people and you don't already have a base of viewers, then using YouTube is a great way because there's already a lot of people on that platform who will have access to your videos. And once they finish watching another video, your video might pop up as a recommendation. Plus, it's going to be a higher ranked result on Google searches as well for YouTube videos, as opposed to these very low ranking decentralized video sharing sites. All right, I think I've went on enough about that. I have a lot of views on that, but going forward, let's see what our third one was. It was how payment processors respond. And this goes back to the point I made about Coinbase connecting to the central bank digital currency and fees. All right, now you have to pay a fee if you move with a credit card or a debit card. In cases, there's fees with online check transactions. Excuse me. So how are they going to handle this? How are payment processors like Visa and MasterCard going to handle the competition that might arise from people offering much lower fees on the same reliable network if these transactions are all settled on a central bank digital currency? How are these payment processors possibly going to keep up with these fees? They're going to have to integrate into the system and have this whole new layer of fees that they're going to have, and it's going to have to be much lower, well, depending on what the fees are just to do any transaction on that network. So if you think about a central bank digital currency, if you were to convert the US dollar to a digital currency, I think ideally you would want it to operate like cash. You would want to be able to give money to someone else without there being a fee. Now, there is also the option that since this is a state currency, that if you transact, there could be a tax. And this is similar to a transaction fee on the network. There could be a 3% federal tax on every transaction. And you can't get around it because it's programmed into the digital currency itself. I think that's highly unlikely to happen, at least to that level. There might be a minor fee, well, not a Bitcoin mining fee, so to say, but a minor fee as in a small percentage, as in a very small percentage. But that's yet to be seen, so I don't want to speculate too much on that. But also, payment processors are going to have to respond to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. The fees they offer can be much lower. Transactions can happen much quicker. So how Visa and MasterCard respond over the next decade is, in my opinion, going to be a very large part of the next decade, because either these digital currencies are going to become more adopted, or Bitcoin is going to become more adopted, or other cryptocurrencies, or both Bitcoin and digital currencies are going to become more well adopted. And these people who rely on processing payments are either going to be facing a huge threat, or they're going to adapt, and adopt those new technologies and try to find a way to fit into that ecosystem. Now, I have a feeling that when these central bank digital currencies are being put forth, that there's going to be lobbyists from banks, payment processors, all kinds of financial institutions wanting to sink their teeth into this in a regulatory way so that they get money still that they would have lost out on. So if you're, facing a transaction fee for using your debit card, the bank is essentially losing that money if you were to instead use a central bank digital currency card, if there were no fees. So what's I see going to happen is there are going to be lobbyists from all these different institutions who are going to step up to try and say, we need this money. Our systems are too big to fail. And what are we going to do if we don't have this money? We can't continue operating. And they're going to make this argument that, especially early on, that they have this huge segment that they're already working with. I mean, huge segment of payments that they're processing, and then that these digital currencies are going to be a small amount. But as it grows, they're going to have to support both. And how are they going to be able to afford this section if they aren't getting paid for this section? Economies of scale. I mean, it's probably cheaper, per transaction to operate the whole segment as it is to the much smaller segment. So they're going to argue that they're going to need those fees. And it's going to be a very interesting time. Very, very interesting. I can't wait to see the effect on stocks for those particular companies. Now, finally, that pretty much covers it for the video. I did want to touch on adoption just a little bit and just how people are going to be using Bitcoin. And one of the things I really like are companies are starting, very large companies. Rakuten, which is, from what I understand, the Japanese equivalent of Amazon, is offering their loyalty program points to be converted into cryptocurrency. So if, on your Rakuten store card you earned 5% cash back, you could use that 5% cash back to get Bitcoin instead, as opposed to maybe a credit statement or something else. So these are ways that Bitcoin is being adopted by larger retailers already. So it's going to be interesting to see, does Rakuten eventually take a leap from just offering Bitcoin as this kind of fun little reward to an actual payment that can be accepted on their storefront? And then, of course, back to the fees. I'm sorry. I meant to do this. I must have had the tabs out of order. But these are the fees that we're looking at on traditional transfers and cryptocurrency. And if there's a digital currency, it might be zero even if they want to keep it equivalent to cash. Now, I kind of doubt that's going to happen just because I think they're going to want a small fee as a tax to operate that particular network. And what better way to do that than to tax every transaction? That way they know they are getting their money. And if I were the IRS, I would probably push for that as well. That way you don't have to make people report all of these transactions, try and collect money for that at the end of the year. Just my opinion on how that might possibly work. Now you can see why the central bank digital currency, which could potentially be a zero fee or a very small fee like Ethereum and Bitcoin as well, these are all very small fees that scale very well. You could send millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin for $3 to $7 right now. You could also do that for Ethereum or conceivably a digital currency. Whereas something like a credit or debit card, if you wanted to spend a lot of money, you would, of course, pay a percentage fee. Now, something that you would do with a debit card or a credit card is probably going to be small enough that you're going to be able to eat that 2 or 3% on a daily basis. Or as a store, you could eat that on a daily basis. But in the future, why would you take any of these fees other than maybe an ACH over Bitcoin, Ethereum, or a digital currency? So there's a very good reason why it looks like we are moving towards cryptocurrencies or a digital currency or some sort of combination of both. But I really thank you for watching the video. And just a reminder, this is the last 10 years of price action. Let me pull up that other chart just to end the video. Here we are. Let's see if I can get this to scale correctly. All right, so imagine we're on that curve, similar to that. Like I said, my prediction by the end of 2030, just randomly, 200,000, just assuming it might follow a similar curve to what it appears to have done with the circulating supply over the past. But thank you for watching the video. Hopefully we can check back in 10 years and see just how silly or how accurate some of these predictions were. But thanks for watching. If you like the video, please leave a like. And if you like my channel, please subscribe. If you like this type of video, please subscribe. I also have videos related to cryptocurrency trading and all kinds of helpful programming development type stuff to help with that. So thank you for watching and have a great day.